This is how Ares became God, Part 2. Starting at 2000 BC is the Age of Ares, in which Ares, the Greek god of war, would be declared the one true God that has ever existed and ever will live for all eternity. Ares is rooted from the Sumerian god Ishkur. They even share many interesting similarities. Both of them are viewed as sons of the thunder god Enlil, or Zeus, who roughly resemble each other. And Ishkur has two attendants that accompany him in battle, Shalut and Hanesh. Likewise, Ares is also accompanied in battle by Deimos and Phobos, whom are also his two attendants. Now, when we take a look at the translations, interestingly enough, we see Enlil, Ishkur's father, becoming El, the supreme ancient Semitic god, and likewise, his son Ishkur is also referred to as El Shaddai, and not only in pre-Judaic religion, but even in the Judaic religion itself in the Hebrew scriptures, which over time became the English title God Almighty in the English Bibles. Even the title I'm made it into the Hebrew scriptures as I am, another cuneiform title of Ishkur. And we can take a look at the third translation, and we see how Shaddai was also viewed as the destroyer, or the overpower. Essentially, Shaddai can be defined in many ways, as the Almighty, the Mountainer, the Destroyer, the Overpower, or as El Shaddai, God Almighty, God of the Mountains, or even God of the Breast, or the Breasted One, depending on which definition you prefer to use, but under these circumstances, Shaddai can be defined in many different ways. This here is very important, because this is where monotheism began to become more serious, all of course revolving around Ares himself. In this depiction, we see Pharaoh Akhenaten embracing the sun disk above him, with rays coming down. Now, it should be important to note that Adad, whom is also referred to as I am in the Sumerian logograms, Adad is described in the text as having multiple sun rays emanating from him, very similar to Aten, whom in the 14th century BC was declared to be the one true God by Pharaoh Akhenaten himself. For a short time, there was monotheism in Egypt, and he also, Akhenaten, attempted to have all of the images of the old gods and all the texts all over Egypt destroyed, so that way the monotheism of Aten, the sun disk, may be preserved, and that it may not be interfered by any other cults in Egypt that practice religions other than Aten worship. The army that he sent, however, turned against him, and by default he was forced to abdicate the throne, in which his son, Tutankhamun, became pharaoh in the same century. And his son, Tutankhamun, reinstated the old religion and gave back the power that the priests once held, and now they held it again. Now, of course, this religion would seem to be dead, but not so fast. Scholars and historians say that the Kenites and the Midianite traders brought Yahweh along with them in Transjordan and northern Israel along the caravan routes between Egypt and Canaan during the 14th century BCE. However, some give the dates to be 1300 BC to 1200 BC, which is no doubt connected to the declaration of Aten as the one true God, whom was declared so by Akhenaten himself. Despite taking in the monotheistic God into their pantheon, the Israelites still continued to follow the polytheistic tradition. Starting at 1200 BCE, however, things started to get interesting when the Israelites started incorporating the beliefs of the Canaanites into their polytheistic religion. However, some scholars suggest that this event happened at 1000 BCE instead. Nevertheless, we have the following gods that were now officially part of the pantheon of the ancient Semitic religion. Elyon, otherwise known as El Elyon, which means Supreme God or the Supreme One, he was the king of the gods, alongside Astarte, goddess of love, Shaddai, goddess of storms and war, Hera, his consort and queen of the gods, Ashtar, god of war and fertility, Baal, a dying rising god, and Samsu, another sun god. However, he is also viewed as a female sun goddess in some cases. Things start to get really interesting in 720 BCE, when Shaddai was declared to be the national god of Israel. From that point on, polytheism still had strong influence in Israel, as Shaddai was worshipped alongside other gods. Of course, until the 6th century BCE, when the Babylonian captivity occurred. When the Babylonian captivity ended when Cyrus the Great conquered the Babylonians in 538 BCE, the Israelites concluded that Shaddai, otherwise known as Yod-Heh-Vaveh, who would later be translated into the name Yahweh, was controlling both the Babylonians and the Persians, and therefore how could there be any other god except for him? In result, Shaddai was declared to be the one true God and the only God that ever existed and ever will live. Despite Yod-Heh-Vaveh becoming the one true God, polytheism still had influence even on the scriptures in the Bible itself, and one of the most controversial of these polytheistic verses is Deuteronomy 32, 8-9. When Elyon divided the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he established the borders of the nations according to the number of the sons of the gods. Yahweh's portion was his people. Jacob is allotted inheritance. When we take a look at what the word inheritance means, it means something as a quality, characteristic, or other immaterial possession, received from progenitors or predecessors as if by succession. Therefore, no one can inherit something unless that person has parents. An in-law, also known as Elyon, is Ishkur's father, and therefore the long-forgotten father of God. Now, the age of Ares, already, when we take a look at 1400 BC and 1300 BC, they're already about 700 to 800 years into it. However, during this age, astrologers were talking about how the Lamb, the son of Ares, in an astrological sense, would come. This is the Messiah figure, which I will get into that in the following video that I'm going to do. But meanwhile, the last thing I'm going to talk about is Tessub. This is a very important god in the age of Ares, because the kingship in heaven, the Song of Ulukama, both of these things were written between the 14th century BC to the 12th century BC. It was written somewhere between there. But some scholars conjecture that it was definitely written in the 14th century BC or the 13th century BC. It depends on which one you agree with. Nevertheless, this is how the story goes. In the kingship in heaven, we have the first god, Elalu. He is king for 9 years only, and his son Anu is his cupbearer. But then, of course, Anu overthrows Elalu and becomes king in heaven. And he is served by his own son Kumarbi, grandson of Elalu and son of Anu, whom serves Anu as a cupbearer for 9 years during Anu's reign. Then Kumarbi decides to overthrow his father and eat his manhood, which resulted in him giving birth to Tessub in a very painful manner, as his body did not have the right organ structure to give birth. Nevertheless, Teshub was a servant of Kumar-B. In some cases, however, in other cases, he never quite served Kumar-B. It depends on which variation you want to go with. Nevertheless, Kumar-B himself was overthrown by Teshub, his son, the god of war and the god of thunder. And in result, he reigned forever. No other god ever challenged him, and this story was written in the age of Ares. Now when we connect Teshub to Ares directly, we actually find out he's also is referred to by the cuneiform word Im. Just like Adad and Ishkur are also referred to by that title Im. And in this particular case, Teshub would be Ares in the Hittite pantheon, and in the Hurrian pantheon as well. And in this particular case, Kumar-B was identified with El and with Enlil by the Hittites and the Canaanites and the Sumerians, and well, really I should be saying other people associated with the Sumerians. And that's essentially how he became God, and not just to the Israelites, but in many other cultures he was worshipped as the supreme God. But the Israelites only took it to us, basically went the extra mile, by declaring him to be the one true God that will ever live.